The Whitmore estate was a place of quiet luxury, polished marble floors, towering bookshelves, and oil paintings of a family that once laughed loudly in these halls. But now, the house held its breath, as if waiting for something or someone to bring it back to life. Asterisk. Eleanor Whitmore, once the dazzling hostess of high society galas, now sat by the window in her favorite armchair, her hands folded neatly in her lap. Time had been both kind and cruel to her, leaving her with silver-streaked hair and a mind that sometimes slipped away like sand through fingers. Her son, Daniel Whitmore, had built an empire from nothing. A self-made millionaire, he had given his mother everything money could buy: the finest doctors, a live-in staff, a home that looked like it belonged in a magazine. But the one thing he couldn't give her was his time. Or so he told himself. Martha Johnson had been a caregiver for over 20 years. She had seen families in their best and worst moments, the way love could be both a lifeline and an afterthought. When she first arrived at the Whitmore estate, she noticed two things immediately: the silence and the sadness in Mrs. Whitmore's eyes. Most caregivers would stick to the routine: medicine at 8, lunch at noon, bedtime at 9. But Martha did something different. She listened. She noticed how Mrs. Whitmore's fingers would trace the edges of old photo albums, how she sometimes whispered names of people long gone. And so, Martha did what no amount of money could do: she treated Eleanor Whitmore like a person, not just a patient. That night, like many before it, Mrs. Whitmore's mind wandered into shadows. "Where is Daniel?" she asked, her voice thin with worry. "He never comes to see me." Martha knew logic wouldn't calm her. Dementia had a way of bending time, of making old wounds feel fresh. So Martha did what she had learned from her own grandmother: when words fail, music speaks. The melody was simple, but it carried decades of comfort in its notes. Martha's voice, warm and unhurried, filled the room like a blanket tucking itself around weary bones. And just like that, Mrs. Whitmore's breathing steadied. Her grip on the sheets loosened. For a moment, the ghosts in her mind quieted. What Martha didn't know was that someone else was listening. Daniel had come home unannounced, something he hadn't done in years. He told himself it was just a quick visit, a duty check. But as he stood there, frozen in the dim light of the hallway, hearing a stranger sing to his mother with more tenderness than he'd shown in a decade, something inside him shattered. He remembered then. Not the board meetings, not the stock prices, not the accolades. He remembered his mother singing to him when he was small, after nightmares or scraped knees. He remembered her voice, steady and sure, promising him without words that he was safe. When had he last made her feel the same way? In that moment, Daniel Whitmore, the man who had built fortunes with his bare hands, realized something no spreadsheet could measure. Love wasn't in the things he provided. It was in the time he didn't give, the moments he missed, the songs he never sang. And as Martha walked out of the room, unaware she had just altered the course of two lives, Daniel made a silent promise, to his mother, to himself, and to the woman who had shown him what real care looked like. Sometimes, the smallest act of kindness is the one that echoes the loudest. And all it took was a song. The grand Whitmore estate stood silent in the pale morning light. Dew clung to the manicured hedges lining the circular driveway, their perfect geometry a testament to the groundskeeper's daily efforts. Inside the cavernous kitchen, Martha Johnson moved with quiet efficiency, her hands measuring out precise scoops of Colombian coffee grounds. The rich aroma began permeating the air as the machine hissed to life. At the marble island, Daniel Whitmore sat staring at his untouched espresso. The dark circles under his eyes betrayed his sleepless night. His fingers traced the rim of the porcelain cup, a nervous habit from childhood he'd never quite shaken. Every few seconds, his gaze flickered toward the staircase where Martha had disappeared to check on his mother. The house felt different this morning. The usual oppressive silence had been replaced by something more unsettling, a charged quiet that made the hairs on Daniel's arms stand at attention. He couldn't stop hearing the echo of Martha's voice from last night, that soulful hymn floating down the hallway like a ghost from his past. Upstairs, Martha adjusted the pillows behind Eleanor Whitmore's frail shoulders. Sunlight streamed through the bay windows, catching the dust motes dancing in the air. "There we go, Mrs. Whitmore," Martha murmured, smoothing the satin bed jacket with practiced hands. "Let's get you sitting up nice and tall for breakfast." Eleanor's cloudy blue eyes followed Martha's movements with vague recognition. Some days were better than others. Today seemed to be one of the clearer mornings. "You have a lovely voice," Eleanor said suddenly, her words surprisingly crisp. "It reminded me of. Her wrinkled forehead creased in frustration as the memory slipped away. Martha smiled, squeezing Eleanor's hand gently. "That's kind of you to say. My grandmother taught me that song when I was no taller than a fire hydrant." She reached for the hairbrush on the nightstand. "Now, let's get you presentable before your son comes up." Downstairs, Daniel finally abandoned his coffee and began pacing the length of the sunroom. His polished Oxfords clicked against the herringbone hardwood with military precision. Through the floor-to-ceiling windows, he watched the grounds crew tending to the rose bushes, their movements synchronized like a well-oiled machine. Everything on the property operated with flawless efficiency, except the one thing that mattered most. The realization had been creeping up on him since 3:17 a.m. when he'd given up on sleep entirely. All his success, all his wealth meant precisely nothing if his own mother didn't recognize him half the time. The contracts he'd brokered, the mergers he'd engineered, none of it could buy back the years he'd missed, the birthdays he'd skipped, the quiet evenings he could have spent listening to her stories instead of conference calls. A soft knock at the sunroom door startled him from his thoughts. Martha stood in the doorway, her posture straight but not stiff. "Mr. Whitmore, your mother's having a good morning. She's asking for you." Something unfamiliar tightened in Daniel's chest. He couldn't remember the last time his mother had specifically requested his presence. Without a word, he followed Martha up the sweeping staircase, his hand trailing absently along the polished mahogany banister. Eleanor's bedroom door stood slightly ajar. Daniel hesitated, an uncharacteristic nervousness, making his palms damp. Martha gave him an encouraging nod before stepping aside to let him enter alone. The sight that greeted him stole his breath. His mother sat propped against a mountain of pillows, her silver hair brushed to a soft sheen, a paisley shawl draped around her shoulders. But it was her expression that undid him, a tentative smile lighting up her face like he'd just given her the moon. "There's my Danny," Eleanor said, her voice trembling only slightly. In that moment, Daniel Whitmore, Billionaire CEO, felt something inside him crack wide open. He crossed the room in 3 strides and sank to his knees beside the bed, grasping his mother's fragile hands in his own. The words came out choked and raw. "I'm here, Mom. I'm right here." Outside the door, Martha leaned against the wall, blinking away unexpected moisture in her eyes. The hymn she'd sung last evening had been just a simple spiritual, something to calm a restless soul. She'd had no idea it would become the key that unlocked a door long thought sealed shut. Back in the bedroom, Eleanor reached up with shaking fingers to brush a lock of hair from Daniel's forehead, just as she'd done when he was a boy. "You've gotten so thin," she fretted. "Are you eating properly?" Daniel laughed, the sound unfamiliar even to his own ears. It felt good. It felt right. "I will now," he promised, meaning it more than he'd meant anything in years. Downstairs, the grandfather clock chimed 9 times, its rich tones reverberating through the house. For the first time in decades, the Whitmore mansion didn't feel empty. Somewhere between the verses of an old hymn and the breaking of a millionaire's pride, something miraculous had taken root. And it was only just beginning. The morning sun painted golden stripes across the hardwood floors of the Whitmore estate, illuminating particles of dust that floated lazily in the air. The house, usually so silent in these early hours, carried a new energy today. In the kitchen, Martha Johnson stood at the counter, slicing fresh fruit with careful precision. The rhythmic sound of the knife against the cutting board filled the space with a comforting cadence. Daniel Whitmore entered, his usual crisp suit replaced with a simple sweater and slacks. He paused in the doorway, watching Martha work. There was a quiet grace to her movements, an efficiency that spoke of years of caregiving. She hadn't noticed him yet, humming softly under her breath as she arranged the fruit on a porcelain plate. "Good morning," Daniel said, his voice softer than usual. Martha turned, her expression shifting from concentration to mild surprise. "Mr. Whitmore," she said, wiping her hands on her apron. "You're up early." He nodded, stepping further into the room. "Couldn't sleep," he admitted. "Thought I might help with breakfast." Martha studied him for a moment, then gestured to the loaf of bread on the counter. "Toast would be good. Your mother likes it lightly browned with just a bit of butter." Daniel moved to the toaster, feeling oddly out of place in his own kitchen. He'd negotiated billion-dollar deals without breaking a sweat, but the simple act of preparing toast for his mother suddenly felt like the most important task in the world. Upstairs, Eleanor Whitmore stirred in her bed. The sunlight filtering through the curtains warmed her face, and for the first time in months, she woke with a sense of clarity. The fog that usually clouded her mind had lifted slightly, leaving her thoughts sharper, more connected. She turned her head toward the door as she heard footsteps approaching. Martha entered first, carrying a tray with tea and fruit. Daniel followed, holding a plate of toast with almost comical seriousness. "Look who decided to join us this morning," Martha said, setting the tray on the bedside table. Eleanor's eyes focused on her son, and a slow smile spread across her face. "Danny," she said, her voice stronger than it had been in weeks. "You made me breakfast?" Daniel felt something tighten in his chest. He hadn't heard his mother call him Danny since he was in college. "I did," he said, sitting carefully on the edge of the bed. Though Martha did most of the work. Eleanor reached for his hand, her grip surprisingly firm. "It's the thought that counts," she said, her eyes bright. Martha busied herself with fluffing pillows and adjusting curtains, giving them space. She could feel the shift in the room, the unspoken words hanging between mother and son. It was a delicate moment, fragile as spun glass, and she moved quietly, so as not to disturb it. Downstairs, the phone began to ring. Daniel's assistant, no doubt wondering where he was. The office would be expecting him, the meetings piling up, the decisions waiting to be made. But for the first time in his adult life, Daniel found he didn't care. Let them wait. Eleanor took a small bite of toast, chewing slowly. "You used to make me breakfast when you were little," she said suddenly. "Do you remember? You drag a chair to the counter so you could reach the stove." Daniel blinked. He hadn't thought about that in years. The memory surfaced like a long-lost treasure, the feel of the chair wobbling beneath him, the smell of burning bread when he got distracted, his mother's laughter as she rescued yet another failed attempt. "I burned everything," he admitted, smiling. Eleanor laughed, the sound light and musical. "You did. But you were so determined." She reached for her tea, her hands steadier than usual. "You've always been determined." Martha moved toward the door. "I'll give you two some time," she said softly. Daniel looked up, meeting her eyes. There was something there, gratitude, understanding, a silent acknowledgement of the shift happening in this room. Martha nodded once before slipping out, closing the door gently behind her. Alone with his mother, Daniel felt the weight of years pressing down on him. All the missed birthdays, the forgotten anniversaries, the empty chairs at holiday dinners. The excuses he'd made to himself about being too busy, too important, too needed elsewhere. Eleanor seemed to sense his thoughts. She patted his hand. "You're here now," she said simply. And just like that, the past didn't matter as much as the present. Daniel exhaled, feeling something inside him loosen. He picked up a slice of apple from the tray and handed it to his mother. "Remember when we used to make apple pies?" he asked. Eleanor's face lit up. "You'd eat more filling than made it into the crust." They laughed together, the sound drifting through the open window and into the garden below. Outside, the world continued turning. Business deals were made and broken, fortunes rose and fell. But in this room, in this moment, none of that mattered. Martha stood in the hallway, leaning against the wall. She could hear the laughter drifting through the door, warm and genuine. A small smile touched her lips as she pushed away from the wall and headed downstairs. There was laundry to do, medications to organize, a schedule to maintain. Life went on. But something had changed in the Whitmore house. Something fundamental. And Martha had a feeling nothing would ever be quite the same again. The clock in the hallway chimed the hour, its deep tones resonating through the house. Somewhere in the garden, a bird began to sing. The day stretched ahead, full of ordinary moments that suddenly seemed anything but ordinary. And in a bedroom upstairs, a mother and son sat together, rediscovering each other one memory at a time. The Whitmore estate stood bathed in golden afternoon light, the kind that made even the most ordinary objects glow with quiet significance. The roses in the garden bloomed with renewed vigor, their petals unfurling toward the sun, as if celebrating some private joy. Inside the house, the air carried the faint scent of lemon polish and freshly baked bread, a comforting combination that had become the signature aroma of the transformed home. Martha Johnson moved through the sunlit kitchen with practiced ease, her hands arranging a bouquet of gardenias in a crystal vase. The flowers had been a gift from Daniel that morning, delivered with a simple note that read, "For everything." She touched one delicate petal, marveling at how much could change in so little time. Upstairs, the sound of laughter drifted from Eleanor Whitmore's bedroom. The door stood slightly ajar, allowing the warm tones of conversation to spill into the hallway. Daniel sat beside his mother's chair, his long legs stretched out before him as he flipped through an old photo album. Eleanor's fingers traced the edges of a faded picture, her eyes bright with recognition. "This was your father's favorite suit," she said, tapping the image of a tall man standing proudly beside a young Daniel at his college graduation. He insisted on wearing it even though it was nearly August and sweltering. Daniel smiled, the memory surfacing with unexpected clarity. "I remember." He wouldn't admit he was sweating through it. Eleanor chuckled, the sound rich and full. Stubborn as the day was long, that man. She turned the page, revealing another treasure from the past. "Oh, look at this one." The photograph showed a much younger Eleanor holding a toddler Daniel on her hip, both of them covered in flour. Daniel's chubby hands clutched a wooden spoon like a scepter, his face alight with triumph. "We were making cookies," Eleanor said softly. "You insisted on helping, even though most of the ingredients ended up on the floor." Daniel touched the edge of the photo, feeling the ridges where it had once been tucked into an album corner. "I'd forgotten about that apron you're wearing," he murmured. "The one with the yellow daisies." Eleanor's eyes sparkled. "You remembered." Downstairs, Martha set the finished bouquet on the dining table, stepping back to admire her handiwork. The flowers stood as a silent testament to the changes that had taken root in this house. She turned as the doorbell chimed, its melodic tone echoing through the foyer. A delivery man stood on the porch, holding a large rectangular package. "For Martha Johnson," he said, extending a clipboard for her signature. Martha accepted the package with curious hands, her brow furrowing as she untied the twine binding the brown paper wrapping. Inside lay an exquisite wooden frame containing a handwritten musical score. At the bottom, in elegant calligraphy, read the title, Eleanor's Song. Her breath caught as she recognized the melody, the very hymn she'd sung that first night when Daniel had stood unseen in the hallway. A note slipped from between the pages, Daniel's distinctive handwriting covering the crisp stationery. Had this transcribed, so it would never be lost. "Thank you for helping us find our way back to each other. The Daniel Whitmore Family Foundation for Memory Care launches next month. We'd be honored if you'd join us as Director of Caregiving Initiatives." Martha's fingers trembled against the frame. Outside, a breeze stirred the gardenias on their stems, carrying their sweet fragrance through the open window. Upstairs, the photo album lay forgotten on the bedside table as Eleanor sat at her vanity, watching her son attempt to tie her favorite scarf. His large hands fumbled with a delicate silk, his tongue caught between his teeth in concentration. "Like this?" he asked, stepping back to survey his handiwork. Eleanor tilted her head, examining her reflection. The scarf hung slightly lopsided, the knot bulky where it should have been elegant. "Perfect. Exactly like that," she said, reaching up to pat his cheek. Daniel leaned down to press a kiss to her silver hair, breathing in the familiar scent of her lavender shampoo. "We should go downstairs," he said. "Martha's probably wondering what's keeping us." Eleanor took his offered arm, her grip strong and sure. "Let's not keep her waiting." Together, they made their way down the grand staircase, their footsteps echoing through the house that had once been so empty and now felt so full. In the dining room, Martha stood before the framed musical score, unaware of their approach until Eleanor's voice broke the silence. "Oh my," Eleanor breathed, her eyes lighting upon the gift. "Is that what I think it is?" Martha turned, her face reflecting the same quiet joy that filled the room. "It's your song," she said simply. Daniel watched as his mother crossed to Martha, her hands reaching for the caregivers with easy affection. The two women stood together before the framed music, their heads bent close as they examined the notes. A swell of emotion tightened Daniel's throat as he observed them, the woman who had given him life and the woman who had helped him remember how to live it. The late afternoon sun streamed through the windows, casting their joined silhouettes against the far wall, one image blending seamlessly into the other. Outside, the first fireflies of evening began their dance above the rose bushes, their tiny lights flickering like distant stars. Somewhere in the trees, a mockingbird sang its twilight song, weaving together all the melodies it had ever heard into one perfect, fleeting moment. And in the house that had learned to sing again, three voices joined in quiet harmony, the notes rising through the open windows and into the gathering dusk, where they lingered like a promise kept. The clock in the hallway chimed the hour, its deep tones resonating through walls that had once echoed with silence, but now thrummed with life. Time moved forward, as it always did, but here, in this moment, it felt suspended, a single, shimmering note held aloft by the hands of those who had learned its worth. The song would continue, as songs always do, but this verse, this perfect, imperfect verse, would remain. The end.